Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem are supercharging the number of arrests of immigrants living in the US illegally.
According to Axios, the two are demanding that ICE set a goal of 3,000 arrests per day, triple the number of daily arrests in the first few weeks of Trump's second term. Here's Miller on Fox Thursday.
We can't take the risk of letting these Biden illegals roam around freely so that the next American daughter can get raped, the next American kid can get murdered, the next American family can get splintered and torn apart by people that came into this country unchecked, uncontrolled, unvetted, uninvited by the American people.
ICE already has nearly 49,000 people in custody. In the big, beautiful bill passed earlier this week, House Republicans gave DHS another $147 billion over the next 10 years to fund the mass deportation efforts. ICE has also requested additional staffing, bed space, and resources to hit that target.
Immigration advocates say that more arrests will likely lead to more people wrongfully detained and possibly deported. The push for more deportations comes as Trump was dealt a legal blow Wednesday, when a judge ruled that the administration's bid to deport former Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil is likely unconstitutional. The administration is trying to deport Khalil using a provision of immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to deport any non-citizen who is deemed to be adverse to American foreign policy interests. The judge ruled that the provision was too vague, saying people like Khalil would have no way of knowing what might get them deported. I think probably the targets for immigration arrests is the best place to start. We could come on to Mahmoud Khalil in a second. What do you make of this 3,000 arrests a day figure?
It seems pretty lofty, but I think when you have the goal of getting rid of 20 million illegal aliens, then it makes sense that you have to speed things up a little bit. A few hundred a day is obviously not going to get them to reach that goal in the 4 years of the Trump administration. So I'm supportive of it. I think it's great that they're putting the pressure on. The question then is, do they have the funding available to do it? And do they have basically the strategy available to do it? Is ICE, is DOJ, is DHS capable of actually finding these people in a timely manner and getting to that number of arrests? And that I'm not sure of.
Right, and also finding the right people and not picking up the wrong people as well, right? I mean, this is where the danger arises. I am not on the immigration issue as far to the left as a lot of people in the Democratic Party are, and sometimes the media coverage perplexes me. There was a front page New York Times story earlier this week about a woman, a Venezuelan woman and her 2 children who had decided to return to Venezuela. I'm not quite sure what the problem is with that, although it was certainly the purpose of putting it on the front page of the New York Times was to suggest that it was a big problem. I mean, the woman acknowledged that she was here illegally. She had decided to return to Venezuela rather than remain here. Where I have had the objection, and I think you and I have debated it before, is on things like the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, which I consider the Trump administration to have acted lawlessly on. Here, in terms of the targets and the putting a number on the people who ICE is supposed to arrest, I do think that if they are not sufficiently resourced and if their information is not good enough, it can lead to genuine dangers for American citizens. And we've had instances of this. I mean, it took me 5 minutes to find several instances, like a 19-year-old with learning difficulties by the name of Jose Hermosilla, who was detained for nearly 10 days near Tucson. Another man with dual citizenship detained for nearly 48 hours in Florida. These are people who are American citizens, are being picked up, yes, ultimately released, but having undergone terribly heavy-handed treatment wrongfully.
Yeah, I do think that there should be some on-ramp of due process where people are able to prove that they are who the government says they are, or that they aren't who the government says they are, and that they are in the U.S. legally or illegally. I mean, I think everybody agrees with that. On your point about those headlines about the people being deported and their kids going with them, those are quite troubling because they imply that the children themselves, who are American citizens, were deported. But of course, it was a case of the family wanting the kids to come with them, which I think is
understandable.
Right.
Yeah,
like,
right.
is it? I mean, if the Trump administration said no, your kids have to stay here because they're American, I think people would be rightfully outraged that they don't get to go with the mother. There was another case earlier this week where an Australian woman who's married to an army soldier in Hawaii claimed that she was wrongfully detained at the airport and then sent back to Australia when she was just trying to visit her husband. And then when the full case file came out, it turned out that she was traveling with like 3 or 4 suitcases, including one that was just full of cookware, and that she had met her husband on a previous trip to Hawaii where she was with a boyfriend, broke up with the boyfriend, got married to the U.S. Army soldier like a month later. And so it was pretty obvious based on the facts of the case that she was trying to go to Hawaii to live with him, and she had brought on all these things to make up their house. And it's like, okay, maybe you didn't tell the full story, lady, which is kind of common where news outlets are like, oh my gosh, this woman was wrongfully deported, and then you hear more of the story and you're like, okay, maybe that's not exactly what happened. But yeah, to get to your point, like, there should be due process. People should get a chance to say, I'm not that person that you're claiming that I am. But if an immigration court finds the facts compelling and it is determined that person is in the U.S. illegally, then I think they should be rapidly removed.
Mm-hmm. So to give our audience a brief peek behind the scenes, you had suggested the story about the woman in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a very liberal sounding story for Amber to be suggesting.
I was trying to set you up.
Exactly. You're trying to lull me into a false sense of security to defend that woman and then be like, well, you see. So look, I mean, I think that obviously if there are issues like that where it's plainly against the law to get married, purely for green card purposes and all of that sort of thing. I don't know the particulars of that case. I assume she denies that was her intention.
Oh, of course.
We always give people due process here. I mean, I think that, there are, to my mind, 2 separate points. There is, should people who are here illegally have to leave? And the answer to that largely seems to me to be yes, unless there are very obvious and serious extenuating circumstances. Then there is a separate due process point about things like the mistaken identity we talked about, and also just the fact that, for example, some of the deportations to El Salvador, we still don't really know what the basis for those, in fact, was. There are lots of things claimed that have not been verified, nor have we seen the counter arguments from the people involved. There are still people who have not been officially identified who are now in some prison in El Salvador. So I have much more of a problem with that, and I've much more of a skepticism or suspicion of the Trump administration in that regard than you do. There we are.
Yeah, but I thought that the Supreme Court's initial ruling on the Alien Enemies Act, which is, again, you have to give the person the opportunity to defend themselves against the charges, or at least say that they're not who the government says they are. I think having that standard before the removal to El Salvador is fine, and that probably should be the standard for all of the deportations. But then to say that they're not allowed to use that act at all was where I was like, okay, now I think it's gone too far.
Yeah, and well, I mean, we could get into a whole big debate about that. Yeah. The Alien Enemies Act is predicated on the idea that a foreign government is involved in invading the United States. The Trump administration argues that the government of Venezuela is doing that. I think that's a spurious allegation. I assume you think it is more credible. We will have to agree to disagree, I think, on that one. President Trump wants a lot more from Paramount than their $15 million offer to settle the 60 Minutes lawsuit. We'll discuss that next.